Hello everyone and welcome to the Mana Plus Gaming channel. So, the trailer for the Elden Ring DLC named Shadow of the Erdtree has been live for about a week now. I'm just like most of you, truly excited and eagerly awaiting the release date of this DLC. In the past over 3-minute trailer, we were treated to the latest imagery of this DLC, immersing ourselves in speculation and hypotheses about an enigmatic storyline the trailer hinted at. In this video, I'll compile details and analyses of the imagery presented in the trailer. Most of these are personal perspectives and hypotheses based on my own observations and some theories I've heard from others. Like many of you, I'm driven by imagination and curiosity, eager to uncover an intriguing storyline or what is believed to be the most accurate hypothesis. And now, let's dive into exploring what the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer has to offer.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
Alright, we've just finished examining the initial scenes of the trailer. It's quite easy to recognize the familiar landmark in these scenes. This is indeed Mohgwyn Palace, the place housing the cocoon known as a teleportation gateway capable of taking us to the Land of Shadow, where the events of the DLC unfold. With this opening segment, the trailer presents us with an image of an NPC character standing before the teleportation gate. This individual is wearing a pair of small-sized shoes, leading me to believe that this NPC is likely a girl. The NPC character is draped in a cloak or a long coat, adorned with intricate patterns that are difficult to discern. When I first watched the trailer, I thought this could be Miquella, but upon examining the intricate patterns on the cloak, I changed my mind. Miquella does indeed wear a cloak, but it's devoid of any significant patterns. Although I couldn't discern the patterns on the cloak due to image resolution limitations, upon reviewing the original game sets, I can affirm that only those belonging to the noble class possess garments with such intricate patterns, such as the consort's set or ruler's set. Therefore, it's plausible to believe that this NPC character is a noblewoman standing before the teleportation gate after our battle with Mohg, the Lord of Blood, has concluded. It seems she arrives just after us, before venturing into the Land of Shadow. Towards the end of the trailer, we also hear the voice of a female NPC, further reinforcing this belief. If we only rely on voice and attire, it can be concluded that this female NPC has never appeared in the original game. Around the same time, a male voice emerges, sounding like that of an elderly man. He says, "Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men." We all know that this elderly man is referring to Miquella, the Empyrean companion who has been hiding for the past 2 years, with a tone that seems unsurprised or unimpressed. This leads me to believe that he may be acquainted with or have had previous contact with Miquella in the past. In the next scene, the trailer presents us with a very familiar image, the cocoon containing the body of Miquella, confirmed to be the teleportation gateway to the Land of Shadow. This cocoon is placed on a pedestal hypothesized to be the pelvic bone of a giant. I'm fairly certain that this pelvic bone is an altar added by Mohg, as the trunk of the Erdtree seems to have just enough space to accommodate this single cocoon. As we know, on Miquella's withered arm, there is a ring worn on the ring finger. This ring appears to have the shape of a two-headed snake, but it could also be 3 intertwined ribbons if I'm not mistaken. Mohg might have put it on Miquella's finger, or if it indeed resembles 2 intertwined snakes, it's highly possible that Miquella has a close relationship with Messmer, another new demigod who appeared in the trailer, which I'll discuss later. In this scene, the voice of the man from earlier resurfaces, affirming that Miquella is indeed terrifying. Similar to the way Miquella spoke of him, he is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. You can read this line on the description of Miquella's armor after you defeat her. Anyway, his 2-year disappearance has left the Elden Ring gamers community worldwide scratching their heads searching for lore about him, so I truly have no doubt about the words of this old man. In the next scene, we were presented with the first images of the Land of Shadow. There's so much to consider here. I'll temporarily refer to this area as the Killing Fields. I also have no doubt that this is the same area that appeared in the image of Miquella riding on the back of the horse torrent, which From Software unveiled about a year ago. First, our advertising friend seems to have just stepped out from some canyon. This scene doesn't necessarily depict the solitary road leading into the Land of Shadow after we touch Miquella's cocoon. But I believe that after we teleport here, the teleport gate must be hidden somewhere, maybe under a well? In a mountain gorge? It's very likely in some canyon. The Land of Shadow is clearly a place with uneven geological surfaces. A rugged trail leads us straight into the Killing Fields, a field distinguished by ghost headstones. However, compared to the image From Software unveiled about a year ago, this field seems to lack the presence of ghost headstones shaped like a circle with a sword piercing through them. Why did From Software remove it? I find those ghost headstones very similar to something, and symbol that I'll mention in a few moments. In the original game, we witnessed the sun, the moon, day and night cycles, and clear weather elements. Although they weren't consistent, the reason being that each different region had different geographical designs and climates. Based on the images provided by the trailer, it's clear that the Land of Shadow also experiences day and night cycles like the lands between. What does this signify? A week ago, during a press conference, the game director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, confirmed that the Land of Shadow is physically separated from the lands between. Personally, I'm quite skeptical about this. It's very possible that the Land of Shadow is geography separate from the lands between. Next, I'll mention the elements that seem to be artificial. Firstly, upon closer inspection, there appear to be footprints of either humans or creatures that have passed through here. It has also been confirmed that in the DLC, we will follow Miquella's footsteps. In my speculation, it's very likely that we will be guided by these footprints, similar to the sites of grace throughout the original game. However, these footprints could also be ghost footprints, leading us to New Ash of War to aid us in the challenging new journey. Looking a bit further, we'll see a campsite. In the original game, we encountered campsites at locations that had endured war or were established by an organization as outposts. Upon closer inspection, there are no signs of people or tents in this campsite, so I believe this campsite has been abandoned for a long time. Furthermore, the appearance of a campsite in the Killing Fields along with the ghost headstones is clear evidence of one thing: a battle once took place on this field. A battle known as the Unsung Battle. Next, I'll talk a bit about the architectural forms that appear in this excerpt. Architectural forms are one of the characteristics used to identify the culture and society of a region or country. Based on the trailer footage provided by the publisher, indeed, the architectural forms of the Land of Shadow are very diverse. Here, I'm impressed by this bridge. It looks very similar to the bridges we see in Limgrave or Liurnia. However, upon closer inspection, there's still a slight difference in the shape of the arch below. This bridge leads the way to an architectural structure, likely a Gothic-style castle. The most noticeable feature is the flyers on it. These Gothic architectural forms appear quite frequently throughout the lands between. A prominent example is an Elfiel, Brace of the Erdtree. Now, let's take a look at the architectural structure at position number 10. I'm confident that this is a church with a bell tower and a Latin cross plan. In the original game, we visited many churches, but most of them were rectangular in shape, typical of structures like the churches of Queen Marika. So it's very likely that this church comes from a different culture or worships a different figure that we haven't encountered in the original game. Finally, the architectural structure at position number 11 truly puzzles me. Unlike Stormveil Castle, this castle seems to bear no traces of war like Stormveil does. However, its location is right next to the Killing Fields, where I believe a fierce battle took place. Why is that? Let's temporarily set aside that question. In terms of architecture, I believe it belongs to the Celtic medieval castle style, and it bears a resemblance to Castle Morn that appeared in the original game. But upon closer inspection, interspersed between the cylindrical and square towers, there are pointed towers that have never appeared in the original game. Nonetheless, there are no limits to creativity in a game, and Elden Ring is no exception. This implies that the architectural structures in the Land of Shadow are quite new and diverse, as well as previously unknown in the original game. In the next segment of the trailer, our advertising friend is still traversing the killing fields, but from a top-down perspective. In this scene, aside from the factors I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see the uneven geological terrain of the Land of Shadow. Particularly, there are 4 prominent elements that I can't overlook. Firstly, the ghost headstones are not the only inhabitants on this field. We can also come across architectural structures such as archways and pillars, which I will discuss later. When I first saw these arched gateways in the photo that From Software released about a year ago, I noticed their similarity to memorial designs around the world. Their typical function is to commemorate victims of war. If you look closely at the photo that the developer released a year ago, you can spot some patterns similar to those on Messmer's attire, a character I will analyze later. Although such geometric spirals appear quite frequently in the world of Elden Ring, I cannot deny the striking similarity between them in this case. Furthermore, memorials around the world all share the same characteristic of depicting or inscribing past battle events or crediting a character, an organization. If you can clarify the characteristics of the memorials, you can definitely identify the factions involved in the battle, which here is the unsung battle. In the process of searching for more information about the memorials featured in the trailer, I discovered that there seems to be a difference in the patterns of the memorials between the trailer, the image released a year ago, and the latest image From Software posted on their official website. Why did they change the design? Could they be trying to conceal something? Now, I think I'll discard the design of the memorial from the image released a year ago because I believe it's outdated, but I still keep in mind that there was a spiral pattern on it, similar to the pattern on Messmer's bracers. I'll just compare the differences between the memorial appearing in the trailer and the one that appeared in the image provided by the developer. Overall, they look similar, but let's look at the details. The memorial in the trailer features a circular shape on top, which the one in the image provided by the developer does not have. This could represent the sun or simply be a decorative design. Now, let's focus on the 2 pointed peaks. In the memorial in the trailer, they resemble the tops of stakes used in castle defenses. However, this detail is completely different in the memorial from the image provided by the developer. Here, the positions of the 2 peaks have been replaced with symbols resembling the ghost headstones unveiled in the image from a year ago. And it seems that its design has become simpler compared to the memorial in the trailer. But why is that? Personally, I lean towards the hypothesis that the developers modified them to conceal something, namely, these memorials were originally victory monuments of Messmer and his army. And I believe that the memorial chosen in the game will be the one that appeared in the trailer. At position number 2, I have no doubt that it is a location for collecting the map fragment. Its distinctive shape is very similar, or you could say unmistakable. If you zoom in and have a larger resolution screen, you might even be able to see the writing on it. Although its shape is slightly different from the original game, I believe you will still discover a map fragment here. Next, let's examine the ruins of a village at position number 3. It's quite significant, first because it appears quite prominently in the trailer, at least twice if I remember correctly. But more importantly, this village seems to embody the basic architectural forms predominantly found in the Land of Shadow. Through the characteristics of these primary architectural forms, you can deduce the main inhabitants of this land. In this frame, there's not much to say about it other than it's a pile of ruins, dilapidated remnants of a village with red-tiled roofs after the war. Above it is covered by dark veils. For now, I'll skip discussing this village and delve into it further in the later part of the video. And finally, what cannot be overlooked are the trees in this frame. These trees have no leaves, their branches resemble roots more than branches. But it seems they have been burned or have been dead for a long time. Personally, I lean towards the hypothesis that they have been burned and fallen to the ground, possibly due to war or the actions of an enemy group for their owners. It's also worth mentioning that I lean towards the idea that these are actually remnants of a species of tree revered and preserved by the indigenous people here. Later on, I'll delve deeper into the details of these trees to shed light on them, as they appear quite frequently in the trailer. Now, let's admire a scene that could be said to encompass at least 50% of the Land of Shadows area. This scene contains a wealth of information, but within the scope of my limited knowledge, I'll do my best to clarify the significance, names, and locations of the elements that I believe could support my hypotheses. The first thing that's easily noticeable is the uneven geological surface of the Land of Shadow. We can see that it appears to be dominated by geological formations similar to rocks colliding and stacking upon each other. This peculiar terrain design gives the Land of Shadow a grand yet treacherous layout, evoking curiosity and exploration. But I wonder what caused the terrain here to become like this. Logically speaking, it seems that this land may have experienced some sort of natural disaster like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or tsunamis, causing the geological foundation to shift. Alternatively, it could simply be a design choice by From Software aimed at overwhelming us with its grandeur. Or perhaps the Land of Shadow was originally a land composed of many islands, with rocky outcrops floating in the air. In my mind at this moment, I'm leaning towards the idea that the Land of Shadow currently exists as a floating land in the sky similar to Fair Missoula. In the process of searching for information, I have also found some factors supporting this hypothesis. Firstly, the appearance of the sun, moon in the trailer is clear evidence that the Land of Shadow cannot be located underground. In a recent interview with IGN, Mr. Miyazaki said, and it takes place, again, on an entirely separate, physically separate map. So it will involve a warp of sorts to get there. Yes, so the first factor is that the Land of Shadow is physically separate from the land between, and so it will involve a warp of sorts to get there. Certainly, we will need to touch the withered arm of Miquella to get there. Touching this arm, as I understand it, implies that Miquella is the one who has called us to the Land of Shadow. It's very possible that he was the first to discover how to access that area by leaving his body behind. Do we also need to leave our bodies behind to get there? Now, let's compare the sun and moon of Land of Shadow and the land between. Between them, there's a slight difference. First of all, in the land between, the sun seems to be rarely seen, partly due to the weather factor, as the sky in the original game seems to be always covered by many clouds. Another factor contributing to the sun's dimness is the light of Erdtree enveloping everything. In contrast to the land between, the sun of Land of Shadow seems to shine very intensely, despite the dense clouds or even dust covering everywhere, even on the ground, and the sun here is also larger than the sun in the land between. Why is that? The explanation for this can only be that the Land of Shadow is closer to the sun and not under the influence of Erdtree's light. This is similar to when you stand on the equator, your view of the sun will be lower, thus making the sun appear larger and covering a wider sky. While we can't always directly apply real-world physics to a creatively boundless game, it's still a factor worth considering. I've also compared the moon in the land between and the moon in Land of Shadow. They seem to be of the same size and phase. However, the moon in Land of Shadow appears to be brighter white, with a higher brightness than the moon in the original game. The moon in the picture I took in Limgrave has a pale sea blue color, which I think is due to the clouds and mist covering it. Therefore, I believe that the moon in Land of Shadow seen in the trailer is likely to be visible in a clear sky without fog. The difference here is similar to the moon when viewed from the ground and when viewed from an airplane. So, if Land of Shadow is situated in the sky, a position amidst the clouds making it easier to observe the moon and the sun, then it's quite reasonable. As we know, the sun in the land between rises in the northeast and sets in the southwest, so I believe the sun in Land of Shadow follows a similar phase. Therefore, Land of Shadow cannot be underground or in a different dimension. But if we only rely on the factors of size and brightness of the moon and the sun to conclude that Land of Shadow is in the sky, it's not sufficient. Additionally, in the trailer, it seems that there are no visible stars in the sky of Land of Shadow, which is quite different from the star-filled sky of the land between. Why is that? As we know, defeating General Radon is a necessary condition to access Land of Shadow. After defeating him, the stars will be released to continue moving. Some stars even fall to the ground and reveal entrances to certain areas, such as the entrance to the city of Nokron. Therefore, the absence of stars in the sky of Land of Shadow could be explained by the impact of the player defeating General Radon previously. However, I believe that the condition of defeating Radon to access Land of Shadow is just a secondary factor. Clearly, From Software wouldn't reuse a pre-existing element for the DLC without further creativity. Hence, defeating Radon seems to have a larger significance, possibly directly explaining the geographical location and the reason why Land of Shadow is physically disconnected from the land between. As we know, firstly, when stars fall, they seem to bring with them a kind of power that makes the land where they fall undergo gravitational anomalies, as exemplified by the entrance to the city of Nokron. We can observe a sky area enveloped by floating rocks, a phenomenon similar to the crumbling Fair Missoula area. If Land of Shadow is also a floating land in the sky like this, then defeating Radon might destabilize the gravity of this land, allowing us to access it, which is quite plausible. But a question arises here: if Land of Shadow is floating in the sky, then since when? I'll set aside this question for now. I'll investigate and present my hypothesis later. Secondly, stars in the game have long been known as entities capable of controlling or altering the fate of humans, or even that of a god. The item Amber Starlight Shard states, if the stars command our fates, then amber-hued stars must command the fates of the gods. Furthermore, if you don't defeat Radon, you can't continue Runni's questline. When you follow Runni's questline, you'll have the chance to meet Sorceress Selen. She will tell you, the stars alter the fate of the Carrion royal family. And the fate of your mistress, Runni. But long ago, General Radon challenged the swirling constellations, and in a crushing victory, arrested their cycles. Now, he is the force that repulses the stars. If General Radon were to die, the stars would resume their movement. And so, too, would Runni's destiny. Therefore, firstly, the disappearance of stars in the sky of Land of Shadow may imply that the fate of the inhabitants of this land will now be determined by themselves. Secondly, it may imply that Miquella's arrival in Land of Shadow is an attempt to change his own fate and that of his people like the Albinoric or the Misbegotten, or even to resurrect his comrade Godwyn or ensure Godwyn's truly death. Remember that the grove in which you find the Amber Starlight is hidden in the Altus Plateau. It is at the foot of a statue, and surrounded by sacramental buds. Sacramental buds are associated with Miquella, and the statue itself depicts Malnia and Miquella. But regardless, the disappearance of stars in the sky of Land of Shadow is undoubtedly closely related to the death of the god Radon. Answering this question might prove the hypothesis that Land of Shadow is indeed a floating land in the sky or provide us with a relative position between Land of Shadow and the land between. Now let's return to the shadow of the Erdtree trailer. If someone were to ask me what impressed me the most in that segment, the answer would undoubtedly be the corrupted tree and the giant veils looming above it. Firstly, this image has a brownish-yellow hue. This brownish-yellow coloration may be explained by the sky of the Land of Shadow, containing too much dust emitted from the massive tree, covering everything. Moreover, upon closer inspection, there seems to be the presence of clouds seemingly floating in between layers of geological formations. In short, it appears that the Land of Shadow is situated amidst clouds. Look at this giant tree, the focal point in this scene. This tree is obviously dying. You can see it has shed all its leaves, exposing its trunk and withered, brittle branches. Particularly, there seems to be a reddish-yellow fluid oozing out from its trunk, likely tree sap. Now, before we delve deeper into this tree, could you please consider subscribing, liking, or sharing to support me in creating more videos of higher quality? Or feel free to drop a generous comment below to provide feedback and engage in further discussion about the assumptions of this DLC. Your support means a lot to me. To further analyze this tree, I'll start with its shape. Perhaps the first step is to compare its shape to that of the Erdtree tree in the original game. In the original game, we were presented with a healthy Erdtree tree, boasting a robust, straight trunk, majestic and dense foliage that emitted light daily, capable of dimming the sunlight. This stands in stark contrast to the tree in the DLC, which has withered branches, shed all its leaves, and has a trunk that appears to have endured thousands of years, now in the final stages of its life. Now, let's compare this dying tree to the burning Erdtree tree in the original game. This time, the foliage of the Erdtree in the original game has been consumed by the flames of the giant, revealing bare branches. We can clearly see similarities between the branches of these trees, but that's the only similarity. However, their trunks are entirely different. What's particularly notable is that the beams of light emanating from the Erdtree in the original game seem to originate more from its foliage than its trunk. Why is that? Lastly, if you stand from a distance and look at the Erdtree tree in the original game, it seems translucent, as if it were an illusion, contrasting entirely with the tree in the DLC, which is a solid entity. In summary, comparing the shapes of the two trees allows us to conclude that the tree nearing death in the DLC appears to be much older than the Erdtree tree in the original game, which has a straight trunk, symbolizing youthfulness. The tree in the DLC could be likened to an old man with a hunched back, while the Erdtree tree in the original game could be likened to a strong young man. Therefore, between these two trees, which one came first and which one came later, I believe you can already guess. As we know, the Erdtree tree in the original game had previously been burned once before they arrived, and we burned it again with the flames of the giant. There are many factors in the game that prove this, and I won't mention them again. Therefore, upon careful consideration, it seems that the current Erdtree tree in the original game has been recreated during its golden age through illusion, a kind of illusion similar to the way Morgwyn uses to create his weapons during the battle with him. The gate itself leading into the interior of the Erdtree trunk in Leyndell capital is also quite special, as it bears intricate carvings that could provide us with more information about the Elden Ring lore. Overall, from bottom to top, it seems to hint at the relative positions of the worlds. If you use Google and search for the keyword Yggdrasil, you'll find many results showing surprising similarities between them. Certainly, the Elden Ring game borrowing elements from Norse or Celtic mythology is not unfamiliar. Now, looking from bottom to top of the gate, we see the roots of the Erdtree where the Elden Ring is a part of it. Next is the Erdtree itself, unmistakably with its straight trunk and dense foliage, making it hard to mistake. However, what's particularly special is that above this Erdtree, there is a spherical object that strongly resembles the cocoon containing the body of Miquella at Mohgwyn Place. And at the top, there is a sculpted part that resembles a tree, but it's a tree that has shed its leaves, with numerous twisted branches intertwined. The design of the gate containing these images may indeed suggest that From Software has long hinted at some aspects of the Elden Ring DLC, at least that it will involve the appearance of another tree. Now, once again comparing this gate to the imagery of Yggdrasil, we can easily see that the root portion containing the Elden Ring corresponds to Niflheim and Muspelheim, while the Erdtree portion corresponds to Midgard, the world of humans, and corresponds to the land between. At the top is the DLC's tree, corresponding to Asgard, and finally, between Erdtree and the DLC's tree is Miquella's cocoon, corresponding to the Bifrost Bridge connecting Asgard and Midgard, and of course, also resembling the cocoon connecting the land between with the Land of Shadow in terms of significance. In a previous press conference, Mr. Miyazaki also confirmed that the Land of Shadow is physically separate from the land between and fundamentally, they exist within the same world. Therefore, I will simplify and omit the multi-world elements in this case. Thus, it's highly possible that the root portion containing the Elden Ring symbolizes the underground realm, including Nokron, Nokstella, deep root depths, etc., and the Elden Ring icon could imply that it is the root of everything, creating all things. Next is the Erdtree, representing the ground, including the areas known in the original game. In short, it is the land between or the ground realm. And at the top, standing above all is the DLC's tree, representing the sky realm, implying that the Land of Shadow is indeed a realm belonging to the sky, hovering in the air, and Miquella's cocoon will serve as an elevator to approach the Land of Shadow. But if the Land of Shadow is a realm in the sky, was it present since the world's creation, or did an event or catastrophe occur that caused this entire land to float in the sky? The explanation for this is quite straightforward. In reality, the Land of Shadow was formerly a land closely connected to the Land Between, and somehow it was transported into the sky. On the From Software website, there is a posted image where we can see that the vegetation in this picture is almost identical to that in Limgrave, most notably the presence of roa trees. And notably, in this image, there are appearances of columnar trees, remnants of a civilization that was destroyed in the distant past, and they could be the work of those who lived alongside the golems, directly creating the divine towers and golems. These columnar trees appear everywhere in the Land Between, in places like Limgrave, Altus Plateau, Liurnia, and even the mountaintop of the giants, and so on. And if you ask whether the location of these ruins appears in the trailer, the answer is yes, it's right here, amidst a lush green forest. Moreover, these ruins are not depicted on the game map, despite their large size and abundant presence in other areas of the game. Why is that? Could it be that someone, or the game developers, deliberately concealed them for a certain purpose? Personally, I believe they belong to a civilization that was destroyed in the past, and From Software's decision not to depict them on the map suggests that this civilization has been forgotten. However, there is one exception, the paintings of the wandering artist. Most of his paintings feature these ruins to some extent. It's possible that he has a special love to them, as if he wants to declare, the game map doesn't show these ruins? No problem, I'll paint them in my art. Returning to the ancient ruins, as we know, in Limgrave and some other areas like Liurnia, there are appearances of very large rubble believed to have fallen from the sky and belonging to a certain temple. There is a hypothesis that it belongs to crumbling Farum Azula because some typical patterns appear on these ruins corresponding to the patterns seen on the structures in Farum Azula. Personally, I reject this hypothesis, because although they share some common decorative patterns, they are not consistent. For example, the ruins of Farum Azula often have many animal bones on the surface, but do not appear on the rubble that fell into Limgrave. Moreover, the location of Farum Azula is far to the east of the Land Between, while Limgrave is located to the west. If there was a storm powerful enough to carry such huge fragments of rubble from Farum Azula to Limgrave, then that same storm would likely have enough power to carry away the Land Between, or at the very least, it would leave massive destructive traces behind. Now, another factor that might lead me to believe that the Land of Shadow was once part of the Land Between is this location, a bell tower similar to the four belfries towers in Liurnia. As we know, in the original game, the bell towers at the four belfries had portals that could teleport us to different areas in the game. However, only 3 of the bell towers had instant teleportation portals, while the 4th bell tower at the top of the hill had no portals at all. Therefore, I believe that the 4th bell tower will serve as the gateway directly leading us to the Land of Shadow. But I believe, just like the 3 portals in the other bell towers, they all lead us to small areas disconnected from the main area, and the portal in the 4th bell tower will do the same. It will take us to a very small area belonging to the Land of Shadow and will not allow us to access the other areas there. Perhaps we will have to complete a series of side quests in the Land of Shadow before the portal in Liurnia opens for us, and of course, you will need the imbued sword key to access the teleportation portals. Furthermore, in an image on From Software's website, we can clearly see the presence of a winged serpent statue similar to those in MT Gelmir. This winged serpent statue serves as clear evidence that the worship culture in the Land of Shadow bears significant similarities to that of the Land of Between. I'll reserve discussion of this serpent statue for later in the video and won't mention it further for now. With these factors I've outlined, it's evident that the Land of Shadow was once a land intimately connected, both physically and geographically, to the Land of Between. Now, let's return to the tree in the DLC. Anyone who first sees it will notice that a red glowing yellow liquid seems to flow from the tree trunk, which appears to be tree resin. However, upon closer inspection, it seems that the yellow liquid is cascading like a waterfall down to a tower below, which I'll temporarily refer to as the Barad-dur Tower due to its characteristic shape resembling its namesake. This tower is clearly harvesting tree resin, resembling a giant funnel that is unmistakable. Comparing the color of this liquid to the artificial yellow covering the Erdtree in the base game, they are clearly different, as the tree resin has red glows while the Erdtree does not. To delve deeper into this, we may need to start with the various forms of liquid known in the base game. Surely, they will provide some vague information about the liquid stream believed to be tree resin similar to that of the DLC's tree. First, we know that in the past, there was a time when the Erdtree flourished, creating the Age of Plenty. The description of the icon shield reads, "Great shield painted with a divine scene, the recipients of a blessed tear from the Erdtree." An item that looks back fondly on the Age of Plenty, the divine scene acts in and of itself as a sacred invocation, gradually restoring the carrier's HP. Another item named Blessed Dew Talisman has the description, "It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that Age of Plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became more an object of faith." So, the Erdtree itself once released a resin-like substance similar to that of the DLC's tree, and there are many theories that after Queen Marika sealed the Rune of Death, thereby stripping away the laws of mortality, the Erdtree no longer had bodies and souls to consume, and the Age of Plenty also ended. The Erdtree is a form of the Crucible, from which all life originates. In summary, the Erdtree and the Crucible are like the root part of all things, containing life and bestowing life. What exactly is the Crucible? There are many items that provide us with more information about it, most of which come from the Crucible Knights in the base game. Through exploring the Crucible Knights, you can understand, to some extent, the closest hypothetical level about the Crucible, its primal essence, its relationship to the Erdtree, the omens, and the rejection or contempt for the Crucible during the Age of the Erdtree. The descriptions of the Siluria's tree item state, Siluria's tree, weapon of one of the two honored as foremost among the Crucible Knights. The primordial form of the Erdtree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modeled on its crucible, is imbued with ancient holy essence. Thus, it can be inferred that the Crucible has a close affinity with nature, with life itself. The incantations of the aspects of the Crucible also confirm that the Crucible is where life once fused together, with significant traces such as horns, wings, scales, feathers, tails appearing on the bodies of humans or animals, for example, the omens, misbegotten, or even plants like Miranda flowers. Importantly, the omens or misbegotten, or more accurately, the Crucible and its representatives, were once symbols of holiness but were completely scorned and disregarded under the reign of the Erdtree. So, what is the ancient holy essence? Is it the resin of the Erdtree? Or is it the resin of the DLC's tree? Perhaps both are correct, though everything is just speculation. But I have some reasons to believe that the DLC's tree is indeed the Crucible tree in the lore. If you've watched the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, you'll likely notice the presence of omens everywhere. Now, before we delve into the peculiar sky veils covering the Land of Shadow, let's examine the church in the right corner of the image. As discussed earlier in this video, this is a new style church with a Latin cross plan that has never appeared in the base game. It's uncertain whom or what it worships, but I believe that the Land of Shadow once experienced a period of coexistence under the reign of Queen Marika before it was purged. It's highly likely that after that event, it was thrown into the sky. If you observe closely, on the promotional poster for the Shadow of the Erdtree Collector's Edition, there's an image from inside a church of Marika, which is unmistakable due to the prominent statue of Queen Marika in it. Anyway, the arrival of the Greater Will and the establishment of order in the land between ultimately may not be a bad thing. It's like a cluttered room that someone comes in and tidies up for you. Perhaps all the trouble stems from Queen Marika having too many offspring, allowing the outer gods to exploit the Empyrean to exert influence and wreak havoc. Returning to the main theme of the video, in this image, one cannot help but be impressed by the enormous veils enveloping the Land of Shadow. Above these veils, they seem to be tethered to the DLC's tree, while the rest of them hang loosely into the cloudy sky. This image naturally evokes in my mind the image of Queen Marika's bedroom with similar veils. So, is there any connection between the Land of Shadow and Queen Marika's bedroom? My answer is no, there's nothing else, besides their somewhat similar artistic design. Technically, such veils serve purposes like mosquito protection, concealment, and protection for the sleeper inside. Therefore, perhaps the image of these veils in the Land of Shadow serves a similar function? Or is it just a metaphor, implying that the Land of Shadow is a hidden land? Personally, I lean towards the latter hypothesis, that the Land of Shadow is indeed a hidden land. It's also worth mentioning that there are many theories suggesting that those veils possess magic capable of making the Land of Shadow invisible to others, similar to the veils on the attire of Black Knight assassins. The item description of the concealing veil talisman reads, "Talisman put together from dark cloth with a lustrous sheen. Completely conceals the wearer's presence while crouching at a distance from foes." Part of one of the concealing veils used by the assassins on the Night of Black Knives. Reading these notes, it's hard for anyone not to think that these dark cloth veils have been used to conceal the Land of Shadow. Personally, I don't think so. As mentioned, the veils in the sky of the Land of Shadow are simply a metaphor, implying that the Land of Shadow is a discrete land, hidden away. It's an artistic design technique that has been seen in the land between itself, where the Erdtree emits its golden rays every day. And the DLC's tree is no different. Although it doesn't emit light, it seems to emanate veils symbolizing darkness, directly explaining the name Land of Shadow for the DLC region. In summary, firstly, I believe that the Land of Shadow was once a region within the land between, and after it was purged following the events of the Unsung Battle, it was thrown up into the sky. Secondly, its relative location must be somewhere hovering above the sea area between the land between, obscured within the clouds. The explanation for the Land of Shadow being situated amidst the land between is because this region historically had cultural and architectural diversity, likely serving as the largest trading and religious hub in the land between, akin to a city located right on the Silk Road. The reason for it being lifted and floating in the sky could be due to gravitational anomalies caused by falling stars onto the land between during a calamity that I believe was caused by opposing factions to the ruling factions of the Land of Shadow after the event of the Unsung Battle. This is closely related to the demigod Radon and his gravitational influence, possibly involving the Carrion royal family or even the mages of Celia. Moreover, defeating the demigod Radon is believed to directly enable access to the Land of Shadow, serving as an indispensable key. Thirdly, the divine tree we see in the DLC is likely the Crucible tree in lore, as the Land of Shadow in the DLC appears to be the homeland of the Omen, who are believed to be symbols of divinity in the past before the age of the Erdtree, which I will analyze later in this video. And fourthly, let's continue to find out what it is. Before moving on to the next part of the video, I kindly ask for your subscription, like, or share to support me in making better quality videos in the future. And please comment down below to discuss together. Now let's move on to the next scene of the trailer. I noticed that there aren't many elements depicted in this image due to the relatively close camera angle. In this shot, there is only one new NPC, followed by an icon that many speculate to be the shape of Miquella's Great Rune. And finally, there are the ghost headstones, which appear to be scattered all over the Land of Shadow, leading me to believe that this land is not just a giant prison, but also a massive graveyard. I'll discuss these ghost headstones in more detail later, as they are quite unique and likely provide additional information about the factions involved in the Unsung Battle in the past. Now, let's focus on this NPC friend first. I believe he's an NPC because his action of turning his head back looks very similar to other NPCs commonly seen in the original game when you approach them from behind. He's wearing armor, helm and a cloak, and just from his attire, you can tell he's a knight. Furthermore, the patterns on his helm and cloak have never appeared in the original game. I spent 30 minutes examining all the types of outfits the original game offers, but it seems that none of the detail patterns match those on his helm or cloak. But if examining the costumes in the original game didn't yield the desired results, what if I try to find clues right within this trailer? Luckily for me, perhaps I've found the answer. First, looking at his helm, disregarding the pattern elements, it's apparent that his helmet is composed of two main metal components. One is brass, weathered over time and faded to a dull yellow color, and the other is a black metal. These two colors of yellow and black seem to have appeared in this trailer, representing the predominant colors of Messmer's soldier armor. Moving on to the cloak. If you look closely, the pattern on his cloak could very well be a stylized design of Messmer's spear. Look at this area. It seems to symbolize fire and represents the spearhead, while below is the spear's shaft. It's really easy to recognize them, and therefore, I believe this NPC friend truly used to be a knight under Messmer's command, likely having participated in the unsung battle in the past. But perhaps there's more to this NPC friend than meets the eye. What caught my attention the most is his neck. It appears he's wearing an iron collar, distinguished by its shape, with a bolt protruding here, and you can also see the marks of a chain or another spike here if I'm not mistaken. It seems like this iron collar is firmly attached to his helm. And of course, I have no doubt that he's a prisoner, right here in the Land of Shadow, which isn't surprising given its history of purging wars. Fundamentally, I believe this land is a giant prison for those exiled, similar to Messmer. However, he seems to be an NPC without hostility towards us. The evidence is that we can easily approach him from behind. What could make a warrior of Messmer become friendly to us like that? It's possible that he holds some secret of Messmer and was imprisoned. Or the best hypothesis I have is that he was subdued, enchanted by Miquella. Remember the words of the man in the opening scene of the trailer.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men.
And remember that Miquella has the ability to make anyone love him. The fact that this warrior appears friendly to us and stands silently staring at a symbol created by holy spell in front of him, something that is said to resemble Miquella's great rune, then I have no doubt. It seems like he has deserted, been imprisoned, and then escaped to follow the footsteps of Miquella. Perhaps he has met Miquella in his own dreams? Miquella abandoning his physical form makes me believe that to meet this hidden Empyrean friend, we can only hope for a dream. In summary, it seems that Miquella and Messmer are the two main and opposing forces in the DLC. Returning to the frame of the trailer we're analyzing. At this moment, our friendly NPC companion stands staring intently at the symbol in front of him, which looks very much like a spear with a circular emblem resembling a crescent moon, and what's even more peculiar is that this spear seems to have been crafted by holy spell and left here. Personally, I believe it could be the work of Miquella, perhaps metaphorically serving as a checkpoint that Miquella has left for us. In the previous press conference, Mr. Miyazaki provided us with information that the Land of Shadow not only has the Tarnished, meaning us players, but also features the presence of characters related to Miquella. Therefore, it's very likely that this NPC friend is one of them, and regardless, he seems friendly. I believe his appearance here is probably to give us some task related to the symbol in front of him. It's quite possible that this symbol serves a role similar to the sculptor's idol in Sekiro, something that we'll have to return to multiple times and use to upgrade our abilities in a similar abilities upgrade mechanism in the Sekiro game. And because of that, the fact that this symbol plays a role similar to the Sites of Grace in the original game is not surprising. Honestly, when watching the trailer up to this point, I'm quite skeptical about whether the system of upgrading power with runes from the original game will still be brought into this DLC. Especially since we have a completely new attack power mechanism now. To be honest, when looking at this symbol, I don't think it resembles Miquella's great rune. If I'm not mistaken, when I played the original game, I never saw any great rune or any icon or pattern of clothing or weapons in the game that seemed similar to the great runes until I defeated a boss, and not counting the Elden Ring symbol, of course. So, I don't believe that the symbol in front of this NPC friend is Miquella's great rune. It's more likely just a personal emblem, a kind of flag or similar. So, the shape of Miquella's great rune isn't the biggest concern. Just like any other great rune, it probably won't leave a lasting impression on you, I believe. However, I dare say that this symbol is indeed Miquella's creation. Instead, perhaps the Ghost Tombstones seem more interesting. As I mentioned earlier in this video, we seem to have seen the appearance of at least 3 types of Ghost Tombstones. Now I'll talk a little more about them. The first type of tombstone resembles traditional tombstones in the game and is likely used for ordinary human soldiers. But the second type has left me quite puzzled. a tombstone that looks like any other tombstone. The noteworthy thing is that it has a round hole in the middle at the top, and I've seen them somewhere before. If I'm not mistaken, they appear scattered in many places across the lands between, but most densely gathered at the Altus Plateau. Additionally, these tombstone designs have appeared in cut content of Dark Souls 3, called God's Grave or something similar. However, besides Altus Plateau, there is another place where such a tombstone can be considered quite famous. That is the tombstone appearing in Castle Morn. Outwardly, it looks no different from the large tombstones appearing in Altus Plateau. However, Castle Morn is a place closely related to the Misbegotten, and when I first came here, the sight that greeted me was overwhelming and horrifying. Bodies hanging, burned everywhere. It seemed like a rebellion had just occurred. As we know, the Misbegotten are despised creatures, treated as slaves, so it's not surprising that they rebel against those who were once their masters. The strange thing is, beside that large tombstone, there are many bodies and weapons placed there, as if they were used as offerings for that tombstone. Moreover, you will encounter the boss Leonine Misbegotten kneeling before that tombstone in a reverent manner. Upon closer inspection, around the hole in the tombstone, there are patterns similar to those of the Omen or the Crucible. You can see it looks very similar to the pattern on the Omen cleaver weapon, which has a note as follows: heavy-bladed curved sword of colossal size awarded to Omen as a tool of war. This weapon is made to take advantage of brute strength. The pattern etched upon the blade is the remnant of a deteriorating malediction. Indeed, when bestowing a weapon, preparations must be made for taking it away. So, those patterns seem to be related to a curse that Omen endured. Some also say that those patterns resemble those of the fingerprint stone shield and represent the 3 fingers, but I don't think so, because I seem to find no significant connection between 3 fingers and Castle Morn or the graveyard in the capital outskirt at Altus Plateau. Indeed, this type of tombstone appears in many places, even in the shadow of the Erdtree trailer. In conclusion, I believe that these tombstones seem to belong to the Misbegotten and the Omen, species closely related to the Crucible. It should also be noted that these tombstones seem to have been around for a long time, evidenced by the patterns on them fading due to weathering, a timeless mark that cannot be denied. The lore about the Misbegotten in the game is quite extensive, and the scope of this video does not allow me to delve into it. However, they are also closely related to our friend Miquella, which I'm sure most of you already know. As for the third tombstone, it bears a striking resemblance to the Halo Scyther weapon used by the Cleanrot Knights. Yes, it's about 80% similar. However, the issue lies in the fact that these ghost tombstones seem to have been present in the Land of Shadow for a long time, and they could very well belong to warriors who fell during the events of the Unsung Battle. Our friend Miquella seems to be a newcomer here, or at least he couldn't have built an army and then sacrificed them right on the killing fields to give him the opportunity to create these ghost tombstones to commemorate them. Something fishy is going on here. Furthermore, this type of tombstone also appears as part of the decoration of the memorials that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a type of memorial featured in the latest promotional images provided by From Software for the DLC. Additionally, during my research, I noticed something. These tombstones not only resemble the Halo Scyther in terms of design, but they also resemble the shape of a spear piercing through a crescent moon, or perhaps a stylized depiction of a spear piercing through a corpse. If you've seen the promotional images for the Collector's Edition DLC, you'll notice the symbol of messmer, which also resembles a spear piercing through a circle, and we'll delve deeper into this symbol later in the video. But I believe that tombstones of this shape belong to the fallen soldiers of Messmer, those who perished in the purging battle in the past. Moreover, in the promotional image for the DLC provided by From Software over a year ago, these tombstones seem to be surrounded by ghostly white smoke. To be precise, they are created from that white smoke. However, in the latest trailer and promotional images, these tombstones seem to have undergone a design change, no longer surrounded by white smoke, but completely replaced, and now they appear to be created from something translucent white and yellow, similar to the weapons created by Morgwyn. Why is that? In another segment of this trailer, you'll notice something I call the smoke generator, and it seems to be emitting ghostly white smoke. I'll discuss it later. In conclusion, I believe that the ghost tombstones are a form of summoning from that white smoke, and they probably belong to the fallen soldiers of Messmer. Now, let's move on to the next scene of the trailer, where we see a warrior standing on a high ground, contemplating something, and it's highly likely that the voiceover of the man appearing in this trailer is his. He stands on some high hill and looks towards the sunset. For those who don't know, in the original game, the sun rises in the northeast and sets in the southwest, so the warrior wearing Roman legionnaire-style armor seems to be facing southwest. As for what's in that direction besides the setting sun, I'm not sure for now, but it's definitely not the direction of the giant dying tree that I've tentatively named the Crucible tree. Precisely, he's facing away from that tree and towards the sunset. This red sky is characteristic of sunset, evoking images of the sky in Caelid, but I believe it's just the crimson sunset sky. Another factor demonstrating the geographical richness of the Land of Shadow is the sharp mountain peaks behind him, resembling the peaks of Mount Gelmir. Looking at this NPC, he seems to be deeply contemplating something, perhaps waiting for the sunset to meet Miquella in his dreams? I'm not sure. Furthermore, his Roman legionnaire-style armor looks really cool, especially with the mask, which is quite common in the world of Elden Ring. But what caught my attention even more is his sword, a greatsword with a guard that seems to be shaped like something. Initially, I thought it was shaped like flames, but that may not be the case here. It's more likely the shape of clouds or smoke gradually rising from the blade upwards, forming the guard of the sword. Does it have anything to do with the smoke generator I mentioned earlier? I believe it does. On the body of that smoke generator, there's a spiral shape similar to the handle of this sword. He might be from a family that crafted such smoke generators, because if you pay attention, his armor and greatsword with that smoke generator seem to be made of the same material, possibly bronze or even gold. But regardless, I'm quite certain that this NPC comes from a noble background, at least his family has had some influence in the Land of Shadow. It would be remiss not to mention his helm, which bears an emblem of concentric circles. Although limited by the resolution of the trailer, I wouldn't be surprised if this detail represents the sun. It closely resembles the concentric circle detail seen in many places across the lands between, such as in Mohgwyn Palace or the elevator leading down to the city of Nokron. In conclusion, I believe he probably belongs to a family or a sect that worships the sun and is directly related to that smoke generator. Additionally, he seems to be aligned against the Crucible tree, evidenced by him facing away from that giant dying tree even though its direction is where the sun rises, and of course, such subtle imagery makes it impossible for me not to take notice. However, I'm not entirely sure whether he opposes those who worship the giant dying tree or those who reside in the castle I referred to as the Gothic castle at the base of that tree. Which faction does the castle belong to? What role does it play in the entire DLC story? It's hard to say for sure. In the next scene of the trailer, we encounter another NPC, and just like the two NPCs in the previous segments of the trailer, this NPC also seems to be gazing up at the sky, deep in thought. Before delving deeper into him, let's talk about what's behind him. First, the location where he is seated is in front of the entrance to a temple that I tentatively call the Sun Temple, which also appears in this trailer. I'll explain why I refer to it as a temple rather than a castle in the later part of this video. Next, we can't miss the presence of Ghost Tombstones. Yes, they're back again, seemingly appearing wherever there's the presence of the withered golden grass, similar to the grass predominantly found in the killing fields, becoming an inseparable pair. Therefore, I believe this grass likely grows from the blood and corpses of soldiers who perished in the event known as the Unsung Battle. In this scene, you can also see the gate wings of the Sun Temple, but most notably, there are the appearances of columns with spiral grooves. These columnar trees also appear in the killing fields as a form of memorials, and their dual spiral groove shapes are also prevalent in the temple right behind him. Historically, these columnar trees, called Solomonic columns, have appeared extensively in the architecture and decoration of the Roman civilization, and today they are still widely used as a form of architectural embellishment. Symbolically, these columnar trees often represent strength, grandeur, or power and are commonly used in two types of structures, religious and political. You can also spot similar columnar trees with double helical grooves on their shafts in the Volcano Manor at Mt. Gelmir, where they are used to adorn the altar of the giant serpent deity. In conclusion, I dare say that in the world of Elden Ring, these columnar trees with spiral grooves are often used in religious, spiritual, or worship structures, and of course, they can also serve as memorials in the killing fields. Therefore, the appearance of these columnar trees at the entrance of a grand structure leaves no doubt in my mind that big structure it is a form of religious edifice. Looking at this warrior NPC, I believe he appears to be quite elderly, evidenced by the worn features of his armor, likely made of metal, possibly iron, and weathered over time. The remaining decorative patterns on his armor bear a striking resemblance to those found on items associated with fire giants. In ancient warrior armor designs, decorations often relate to their exploits or achievements, alongside other simple decorative motifs. Examining the patterns on his armor, it closely resembles a central circle, surrounded by 8 others, a characteristic design associated closely with fire giants. Therefore, it's highly probable that this NPC is a warrior who survived the war against the giants and is one of the champions of the Erdtree, as well as likely being one of the Erdtree faithful mentioned by the man in the trailer. Additionally, the similarity of these patterns to the sun motif suggests they may also represent the sun symbolically. Furthermore, his overall armor seems quite hefty compared to that of an ordinary warrior. We've encountered similar heavily armored NPCs in the original game, but they were few in number. Of particular note is an item related to him in the game, the giant crusher weapon. The weapon's description reads, a hammer made from a boulder, used in the war against the giants. One of the heftiest weapons in the entire lands between. After the giants were quelled, and man turned against man in violence, this weapon was all but forgotten. Man has grown feeble in comparison to his forebears. Therefore, it's likely he indeed survived the war against the giants, and the voiceover in the trailer, sounding like that of an elderly man, is likely his. It's also worth noting that the description of the giant crusher weapon mentions, after the giants were quelled, and man turned against man in violence, this weapon was all but forgotten. This suggests that the unsung battle event likely occurred shortly after the end of the war with the giants, considering the timeline. What about his giant jar? This is a rather unusual looking jar, not commonly seen in the original game. I'm quite certain the material of this jar is stone, but its floral pattern is relatively common. I have no idea about this stone jar other than I believe it's his weapon. In the following scene, yet another NPC appears, and it's unclear whether this individual is male or female due to wearing a mask. Mask-wearing culture in Elden Ring is quite common, and I won't reiterate it. However, in terms of design, this NPC bears some resemblance to the Zamor Knights who reside in the mountaintops of the giants. From the mask style to the decorative patterns on the crown, the long white hair tied in a braid, and even the strands of rope wrapped around this person, it all evokes surprising similarities to the Zamor people. It's worth noting that the Zamor Knights were directly involved in the war against the giants. Descriptions of items such as the Zamor set provide additional information about them and why they're the age-old enemies of the fire giants. Of course, relying solely on this data to conclude that this NPC is a Zamor Knight would be premature, but I believe this person is closely related to the Zamor and perhaps even connected to the fight against the giants. Moreover, the body proportions of this NPC don't seem to match those of the Zamor, so there might not be much more to say about this NPC. However, what I find most intriguing is the predominant light purple tone of this scene. It all evokes thoughts of Saint Trina, believed to embody Miquella in dreams. We can see this character lying in a rather large cave, with the appearance of many light purple flowers, notably the Trina's lily, a flower closely associated with Saint Trina and her abilities to induce sleep and dreams, which I won't repeat because they are already quite famous. Therefore, it's possible that this NPC is sleeping here, but why? In another scene from the trailer, still in this same cave, still in this dreamy light purple mist, our advertisement friend is seen battling a horse-riding skeletal boss, which I'll discuss later in this video. If you played Dark Souls 3 and defeated the High Lord Wulner boss, then it's very likely that this NPC lying asleep here is playing a role similar to the cup in Dark Souls 3. When we touch this character, we may be transported to their dream world and confront the horse-riding skeletal boss there. This could be an Easter egg created by From Software, something we often see in From Software games. In summary, based on my deduction, it's possible that this NPC is also a fan of Saint Trina, and they might be seeking something related to her in this cave, and getting trapped here in an eternal sleep. And now, the trailer takes us to a very familiar scene, of bird cages, of glintstones that we've seen many times at Raya Lucaria Academy, unmistakable. It seems like the next NPC is sitting on a large chair in a spacious room, and judging by the long benches, it's plausible that this room is a lecture hall. This NPC is wearing a hat that bears a resemblance to the figure of the man in the carrion inverted statue. Upon closer examination of the carrion inverted statue, you can see that the man in the statue is holding a sphere, which I believe to be a celestial sphere. Nonetheless, the carrion royal family has its origins traced back to the descendants of stargazers, who were believed to have built cities reaching almost to the sky. Therefore, I speculate that this man is also from the carrion royal lineage and likely a stargazer himself. So, could he be related to the land of shadow floating in the sky or situated atop a towering mountain peak touching the clouds? As we know, members of the carrion royal family and Raya Lucaria Academy were known for their studies in astrology and the stars. Only until Queen Rennala encountered the full moon did the study of stars become less common. And perhaps, this NPC man is one such individual, continuing that tradition.